Hello, hello, and welcome to Kitchen Table Creativity, where we sit at the kitchen table together. No fancy equipment, no fancy studio is needed. We just paint with what we have on hand, and these projects are for real beginners. Everything that I paint is completely doable for a beginner. And so I encourage you to just grab your supplies that you have on hand and paint along with me. And today we're going to paint this adorable little spring chick who's coming out of an egg. You can use this as an Easter card. You could use this just as a spring decoration or something that you just want to hang up around your house and something that will bring you joy. So I'm going to real quick show you my supplies that I'm going to use today. First of all, I have a piece of watercolor paper here, which is actually a card, and I bought a whole set of these on Amazon. They come with envelopes. They're not very expensive. They're actually quite reasonable, but they aren't like the top of the line quality watercolor paper. They're really good for small projects like this where I'm not going to be painting a big background, but just beware when you paint on this little bit thinner type watercolor paper, it can start to curl up and warp if you put a lot of water on it. So this is going to be fine for this project that we're going to use today. These are scored right down the middle, and so then they fold in half. And I'm going to paint a card today because I'm thinking that I might want to give this as a little Easter card to someone, maybe my grandkids, maybe my daughter. Okay, so then the paints I have on hand is I have a bright yellow, I have an orange, and then I have this cream and this brown. And these two colors, I might not use them both. I think I probably will, but they'll be for the egg and the shadows. And then I have this nice sap green. Now, I tend to not tell you a lot about the different colors that I'm using because I want you to experiment with what you have on hand. You can always try to mix colors, and like say that you didn't have a cream color like this. You could take this very dark brown and add a ton of water to it. Make it so diluted that it looks very light, and you can use that for the eggshell, the lighter parts, and that would work fine. All right, so then what I'm going to do, I am going to trace it like I always like to trace because it makes it so much easier to center things on your paper, and then you don't have to worry about having drawing skills at all. And so you take a piece of, I just have a piece of graphite paper here. I've actually used this several times for other tracings, and it tends to work just fine many times over. Put the graphite face down, put your image over it, and then go ahead and take a stylus or a pen or a pencil and just I'm going to trace the basic outlines. So I'm not going to take the time to do that because I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I am going to turn my camera off, trace it, and then come back so you don't have to sit through that part. And then I have two round brushes. I use these over and over. One is a size 5 and one is a size 2. But use whatever you have on hand. I like the round tips because they have a very fine tip and you can do fine detail work with these. I have a ceramic palette which I'll use to be mixing my paint and thinning it out with water. Then I have a spray bottle. I like to spray water, just plain water on my paints, and that gets them kind of ready to use. And then I have just these pens that I like to add the details with. I have a 05 and a 005 micron black permanent ink. Make sure you have permanent ink. And this is a white roller ball pen that I'll probably add. You can see there's a few details on this. Just kind of make it look like there's a reflection of light. And then I have 3 jars of water over here, which you can't see. I like to have 3 jars on hand because that way you can use the first one to rinse your brush when it's really dirty, and then the other 2 to make it cleaner and cleaner, and then you don't have to keep going back and getting more water. I have a scrap of watercolor paper, which I'm going to use to just test some of the colors probably, and then I always have some extra paper towels for blotting. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and trace this, and I'll be right back. Okay, so you can see now I have this image traced. I just did the basic outlines, but this is such a simple project. I could have just even left the grass off. It'd be very easy to paint that in freehand or to use a pen to draw it in. And so I just encourage you that you know, if you feel like you cannot draw, this is the biggest thing that I hear over and over. The biggest complaint people have is that they say, well, but I can't draw, and so I can't paint, which is just not true at all, because it's completely fine to trace. And just make sure that you get waxless graphite paper, because then you can erase the pencil lines if you want to. A lot of times you won't have to with the method that I teach, because I use these pens to kind of go over it. But if you don't want to do that and you want to be able to erase your lines, then definitely look for the waxless type graphite paper. Okay, so we're going to start with this yellow, and I always say to start with the very lightest colors. It's kind of warm here today, and so my paints, I did wet them, but they're kind of drying out. So I have them off to the side here because I didn't want to get the other part of my card wet or have any paint on it. So just water your yellow down, whatever color you're using. You could use a more gold yellow if you want. And I'm using the number 5 brush, the little bit bigger one. And we're just going to go ahead and paint the whole entire chick with this yellow. And you don't have to really worry too much about like blending or shading. It's such a light color. I have it quite watered down. And the paints that I'm using are the set that I have that's from Japan. I will put a link in the description. And I really like this set a lot because the colors are really, really nice and vivid, and I think it's really going to last me a long, long time because the pans are pretty big. They're paints, they're not in tubes. And I tend to like the ones that come in the pans a little bit better. And I guess this is just my preference. I'm sure there's lots of people, lots of artists who would tell you otherwise. But I like to be able to, I guess, not have to waste paint, bottom line, because when you have the tubes, you know, you have to put the paint on your palette from the tube, and then when it dries, you have to either store it on the palette, and then you can go back and reuse it, which is great. But I tend to just end up wasting it and washing it off because I want to use that palette again for other colors. So, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to stop with this now, and I'm going to move on to the egg. Now for the egg, I'm going to go ahead and rinse my brush really well. Always rinse your brush really well, even if it's lighter colors, because they do transfer over. And I have a feeling that this is going to be light enough. It's a very light kind of cream color. It's called Rose Beige in this paint set. And part of the reason why I don't like to tell you the names of the paints and say, oh, you need to get this kind for this project is because, for one thing, you really don't need to. And I don't want you to be locked into that. I don't want you to have to go out and buy a bunch of stuff to do the projects. I don't sell art supplies, and so I just want people to be free to use what they have on hand. That's my whole thing, is like, just start. You know, don't worry so much about having the perfect supplies. And so right now I'm just using this very light color. I really don't have it watered down a lot. It's pretty light. And I'm just painting this entire egg. Very uniform right now. Okay. So now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the darker brown. This is Raw Umber Deep. And I'm going to water this down a lot because it's a very dark brown. And at this point, it would be fine to go ahead and mix this in if you have that lighter beige color, because that's going to bring it up a little bit quicker. And to do this, I'm just adding a really lot of water, because this is really dark. And then I do want to test it and see how that actually will add some shadows to the egg. And the egg doesn't have to be completely dry for this part, but we're going to go ahead and just add a few, just to kind of give it some depth, a few kind of like lighter shadows. And if the light was coming in from this side, we're gonna leave this part lighter, okay, and then add just a little bit of more dark on this other side. And what I like to do is just add water to my brush and rinse it and kind of just blend this a little bit because I don't really like those harsh edges. And what you can do if you have too much is you can wet your brush, and then you can pretty easily lift off the color if you end up with too much or you don't like the way it's looking. And you can do the same thing if you have too much water. So I'm just going to leave like the bottom part here a little bit darker. And this part on this side I want to make a little bit lighter. So I'm going to add water and lift. And you can just kind of experiment around with what you like and what you would like your egg to look like. Now these two sections behind here, I'm going to add some darker of this color because this part of the egg would be like sort of inside. So there probably would be a shadow. And I'm still using the larger size brush, and notice how I'm able to get this really fine detail work with the very tip of my brush. And then this is how we get darker areas. We just add a little bit darker paint. You could even use the same color lots of times, and you get layers, and that way it makes it look darker, even if you didn't use a different color of paint. And experiment around and see, like sometimes you might want it, you might want more water, you might want to add more water, sometimes you might want to add less water, and just kind of see the results that you get as far as shadows and blending. And I always say, you know, as beginners, you really don't have to worry that much about all the different shading techniques and making everything look very realistic. I love this method that I teach because it's called watercolor sketching. And that just means that we're going to add detail with pen, and it's going to look almost like it was sketched, and that then we went ahead and painted it. Okay, so this is going to be a very quick and fun project. And what I'm also going to do, as long as I have this, I'm going to water that brown down even more. And I'm just going to add a little bit of shadows onto the chick herself or himself. And I don't want a lot of water on this, so I'm using just very, very little bit of water. And this is really just to add a little bit of interest. So that it's not just completely uniform yellow. And see how, like, to me that turned out way too dark under his chin here, so I'm just adding a little more water and lifting off. And that's how, if something that actually you think, oh my gosh, that's a mistake, watercolor is so forgiving because you can do that. You can lift off anything, almost anything, that doesn't turn out exactly the way that you wanted it. All right, so that's just very subtle. I'm just going to leave it at that for now. And once this is dry, sometimes when things dry, they look different. So I always like to wait until it's somewhat dry before I make any decisions on changing anything. Okay. So this is actually almost done. I'm just going to start to add some details. And I'm taking this orange and I'm going to use it pretty much straight out of the palette, out of the pan here, because I want it to be very dark. And I did switch to my little smaller brush here because I'm going to paint the beak and I wanted it to be very dark orange and I want it to be a very fine line. Okay, so I like that. So what I'm going to do now is just add orange to his beak. Okay, and then I think, like, he has rosy cheeks. So I think what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to probably just stay with this orange. I'm not going to add another color in. And I'm going to see if I can create something that looks very, very light. This will probably work. And I'm just going to put a little bit of rosy cheeks on him. I want this to be very subtle. All right, so you can kind of see now how this is dried, and it looks a little bit, I don't know, it looks a little bit blotchy to me. So I'm going to take some water and I'm just going to try to blend this a little bit more because I really don't like the way that brown turned out. Add a little bit more yellow paint. And I'm just going to go over these areas. And so they're still a little bit darker with the yellow over them. And I think I'm going to like that a lot better. And again, because we go back with a pen to add details, you don't have to worry about too much about the lines. All right, so the eyes I'm gonna leave as is, and I'm gonna use the marker for those because I want them to be black and I really don't want to try to hand paint those tiny little eyes in. So I'm gonna use a pen. But I am going to do the grass. And so the grass, I'm going to go back to my small brush, rinse it really well. And the grass, I'm going to use this very small brush. And again, I want it to be quite dark. And I'm going to paint with a very fine touch. So it's a really small line, fine line. And we could add a few more like really small wisps of grass. Okay, and then rinse my brush, and I am going to add just a little bit of brown to these, just for interest again. Put a few dots here and there. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to take some of this brown again, very, very light wash, and I'm just going to create a very light shadow across the bottom of this. And this can kind of also look like the ground that it's sitting on. Just keep it very, very light. And because my paints are still wet here, I'm not really going to want it to bleed into I don't really mind so much the browns, but I don't want it to bleed into the green. So I'm not going to really touch the green. A good thing to do all the time is to wait until things are really dry, but right now I'm feeling a little impatient, I guess. Okay. All right, so I'm pretty happy with the way this has turned out, and the best thing to do at this point is to just wait until everything is really, really dry. So I'm going to go away for a second. I'll be back, and when I come back, we're going to do the final touches. Okay, so now I'm going to use a black fine tip pen, permanent ink. This is a Micron 05, and this is the really fun part, to just outline it, give it some life, give it some detail with the pen. And just to make sure that everything is really super dry, I like to just kind of test it, make sure that yes, it is very dry, because you don't want to smear your paint. And so I'm going to start with these eyes because I wanted to give him just a little bit of reflection in his eye. So I'm going to leave just a little bit of white. And then I'm going to outline his beak. And then just to go around the entire project, and you can kind of just with a very light touch do this outlining. You don't really have to press very hard. You don't want it to be like a really super rigid outline. You want to make it look sort of like you sketched it with this pen and then you went back and painted it. And that's why they call it watercolor sketching. Doesn't have to be exact. It should actually not be exact to make it really show that it was hand done. You don't want to make it look like it was printed. And watercolor painting in general is actually a very therapeutic thing, especially for recovering perfectionists like me who want everything to be perfect. And the watercolor tends to have a life of its own, a mind of its own. So you have to kind of just go with it, you know, and sometimes things might not come out exactly the way you thought. And just keep in mind that it's just a matter of practicing. And then what I'm going to do with these, I think I'm just going to leave the grass as it is. I don't really think it needs very much outline, maybe ever so slightly. A little bit of definition with the pen. Okay, so he is almost done. And the last thing that I always like to do is sign my work, and I always recommend that people sign their work, because that way you can always, not only does it make it truly yours, but you can always see your progress. You know, and maybe I'm going to give this to someone, maybe not, but I really always recommend that you sign your work. And then the last thing, I am going to add just a tiny bit of white, and I'm going to put it here on the egg first, because I want to create like a reflection sort of here. And if you have white paint, you can use that. You don't have to use a white pen, or you really could skip this step altogether. It's really not super, super important. And a lot of times the white doesn't show up really super well. And you might have to go over it a few times after it dries if you want it darker. So for the last step, you might want to just go take a look, step back, take a look at your work and see if there's anything you want to add, any more blending you want to do. And I did go back and I used this Sharpie paint pen to add a little more of the white. That roller ball that I was using really wasn't covering well enough, and it might just be running out of ink, but I had the Sharpie on hand, so I went ahead and did that. I don't know if you can see it in the video, but it was mainly here. All right, so when I sign my work, I almost always like to just do it in the right-hand corner, bottom corner. Depends on what it is, but almost always that's what I do. And I just use my initials, and I use a 005 pen, and I just make it very small and light. And I always put very small the date. So you can use whatever kind of mark you want to sign your work, but I think, like I always say, it is very important. Okay, so he is done. Now I have this on a card, so I can go ahead and fold it. I could write on the inside. I could print out something on my printer, cut it out, put it on the inside. Or I could even go ahead and put Happy Easter, you know, whatever speaks to your heart. You know, I usually like to leave my work when I give cards like this, because that way, if the person wanted to just cut it and frame it, they could. And so a lot of times I don't add extra words or extra embellishments to the front, to my artwork. Now, if there's any pencil lines, like you can see there's a slight little line here. I don't really care that much about it, but you could take an eraser and go ahead and erase some of those lines if you want to. But it's not really necessary. I think most people probably would not even notice it unless you're also a watercolor artist. Okay, so if you enjoyed this project, I would absolutely love for you to join a free workshop with me. I do my workshops once a month, and I will put a link in the description so you can find it. You can register, totally free to come. And I have a monthly watercolor circle of women who we meet online a couple times a month. So you might be interested in joining that too. And I would love for you to send me, post copies of your work online and tag me, whether it's Instagram or Facebook. I also have a women's Facebook group. And inside of there, I give more watercolor tips and I share ideas and creativity. And so I would absolutely love for you to upload your work in there and show everybody what you've done. It's a very safe community of beginner artists. We are not, people hesitate to even call themselves an artist, but if you do art, you are an artist. I think we need to own that. Now, there's tons of artists out there that are a lot more experienced than I am, but that's okay because I'm still practicing and learning, and that's why I love to teach other people how to just get started and just start practicing, and we can evolve and grow together with our art. Okay, have a great rest of your day or your evening, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.